Thank you, Jane. We've got the great privilege of welcoming Paul Thompson and Mindy Aller as our guests today. Both of these remarkable people combine a passion for climate change with a passion for Nordic skiing. Mindy is the regional director for the Citizens Climate Lobby and co-director of Cool Planet. And she just completed her 4th Birkie as part of the Birkie 40 campaign. Paul is a returned Peace Corps volunteer from the Malaysian Borneo, where he served from 1971 to 1973. He is founder and co-director of Cool Planet, and he just completed his 40th Birkie ski marathon and raised $35,000 for Cool Planet skiers, Citizens Climate Lobby, Braver Angels, and RPCVs for environmental action. Today, they will familiarize us with a terrific organization called Citizens Climate Lobby, which is focused on promoting a bipartisan solution to our climate crisis that also makes enormous sense from an economic perspective. They are going to tell us about their work. So please join me in giving a big Plymouth welcome to Paul and Mindy.
Thank you, David. And it's fun in looking at the attendees list. We see some friends out there. So it's good to be here. I'm going to share my slide.
Great. Hi, everybody. It's really great to see. I'm looking at other people saying hi to Jim and Bryce, and it's so great to be here. And I want to thank Jim Linfesti, an old friend, for setting this up a long time ago. And I thought, April, oh my gosh, that's like 3 or 4 months. Then I said, these guys are really well planned. So thank you to all of you to take time on a Sunday morning, on this Masters Sunday morning, to hear from us and for the great work that you've done over the decades at Plymouth Church. So Mindy Aller is my wife and the regional coordinator of Citizens Climate Lobby.
And I also want to introduce Paul Thompson, my husband. And as you see the background, we are actually sitting next to each other, who is a special operations volunteer for our Citizens Climate Lobby. I just want to tell you a little bit more about myself too. I'm a lifelong Minnesotan. I was born and raised in St. Paul, and I love the 4 seasons that we have in Minnesota. I enjoy being outside, skiing, biking, paddling. And though I've lived in a city all my life, I love growing and making things, I think due to my early influence by Laura Ingalls Wilder. I love to garden and preserve food. Salsa is one of my specialties. And I dabble in tapping the maple tree in our backyard. And especially in the winter, I enjoy things like spinning, knitting, and crocheting. So I've also said if I could never leave the state of Minnesota again, I could still be happy, because I think it is one of the most beautiful places where we live. I came to working on climate change through social justice work. I worked in fair trade and also have a Catholic upbringing. And I was previously the director for Minnesota Interfaith Power and Light. So I enjoyed working with a number of Plymouth members when I was in that role. So it's really delightful to be back here again and to see some of our friends on the line. Paul.
Thanks, Mindy. I have to say that living with Mindy is an amazing experience of seeing what's available in your backyard. I've learned to make salsa, to make pickles. We tap maple trees. And the whole idea that we can get so much from our local community, and when we work together, we can even do more. A highlight of 3 years ago, I met Jessie Diggins at the state capitol right after she won her gold medal in cross-country skiing. As David mentioned, I got my start in this work like Bryce Hamilton as a Peace Corps volunteer right out of school. I grew up in South Minneapolis, went to Washburn High School, Gustavus in St. Peter College, and then I spent 5 years in Asia. And that really gave me my career as an elementary teacher, but really even on all of my teaching, learning about the world and teaching people to work together to understand each other has been a lifelong challenge. The skiing has been something that I just love. I'm an athlete. I'm a ball golfer, a Frisbee player, and I will do anything to get outside. So computers really frighten me sometimes because you get stuck behind the computer. And so forming Cool Planet and Cool Planet Skiers was a way for me to do the things I love and to continue to make a difference. And yeah, Minnesota is my home and always will be.
So as David said, though you can see we play many roles in our lives, we are here specifically to talk about Citizens Climate Lobby today. We have some slides to explore these questions with you, but we definitely are going to leave plenty of time at the end for your questions to try and make this as conversational as we can in this virtual environment. But we will just briefly touch on, what do we already know about climate change? Who is Citizens Climate Lobby and what do we support? And what specific actions? We have a few suggestions for you, though I know you're also already an active community. It's always good to hear new ideas.
And we know that many of you are experts in many areas, so please feel free to share your knowledge. Just like we know that 97% of climate scientists agree it's happening, it's bad, and it's caused by us. The thing that's missing is political will, and that also requires human action. The biggest driver of our changing climate is burning of fossil fuels. Coal is now going down, natural gas is going up. We're seeing decreases in some areas, but we have a long ways to go. When we look at what we're up against, 21 of the 23 most hot years were in the last, 21 of the last 23 years have been the hottest ever. Sea level rise is happening everywhere. In southern Florida, they have sunny day floods every time there's a high tide, and the droughts, ocean acidification. So it's a big deal, and we're told that we don't have a lot of time. This shows some of the increasing weather events since the 80s. We've gone up 1 degree Celsius. The costs of climate change have increased by 5 times, and the billion-dollar events in the last 40 years have increased by 4 times. So some people say it costs a lot to solve the problem. It costs a lot more to not do anything.
And there's a lot that we're seeing right here in our own backyards in Minnesota. We are one of the states that faces the greatest threat from widespread summer drought, from increasing heat days in the summer, and in increasing mosquito season. Things like the Zika virus, which have never been seen in our area, are starting to be a risk for us here. And for those of us who are winter sports enthusiasts, Minnesota has one of the where we're seeing warming the fastest is in our nighttime winter temperatures. And it's also meaning less snow and for a shorter period of time. I remember rain on Christmas a few times in the last 5 years, and that was something I had never seen in all of my life in Minnesota. And our shorter winters and warmer winters are also contributing to the rise of Lyme's disease and pests like the emerald ash borer.
So how long do we have? That's a great question. The IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, reports that we have 10 years to cut emissions by 50%. That's a huge, huge target. So we really need all hands on deck. We need all solutions, but we feel that there's one solution that can jumpstart everything that needs to happen. And that's what we're going to talk about now.
Yeah, so we know we need to move quickly, right? So what kind of things make a good climate solution? I'm wondering if some of these might resonate for you. We know we need to drive large-scale change quickly. There are many possible solutions and many great things that are happening towards climate solutions. But how do we move quickly to really reduce our carbon emissions? We need something that's fair, that doesn't put those who are especially at lower incomes at undue risk. So it needs to be a fair solution that doesn't overly burden those who already are burdened. It needs to be good for our planet and good for our economy. And and also durable, something that doesn't shift with changing political leadership, something that can't easily be changed, that really people buy into and want to keep it around, and that incentivizes people to make wise choices for themselves. So with Citizens Climate Lobby, we have looked at all of these criteria and came up with a model of carbon pricing. And I want to mention carbon pricing because that's a term that's more common in the public space right now. You're hearing more and more from businesses, business leaders, and many politicians on both the left and the right. We could point to many options of both Republicans and Democrats that are talking about carbon pricing. There's one specific model that we like at Citizens Climate Lobby that really meets those criteria I just talked about, and it's called carbon fee and dividend. And the really simple way that it works is that you charge a price on fossil fuels at their source. So at the mine, at the well, at the port of entry where it comes into the country. But that's a fairly small number of places right at the source. And then the very important part of this is you don't just keep that money and fight over how it gets used. You take all of the revenue, so a small administration fee is needed, but all the rest of that money goes back to households, to you and me. A full share to an adult, a half share to a child.
So one of the most exciting things for me was 2 years ago, our legislation, after 10 or 11 years of working every month to create this conversation in Congress, the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act was released. We were up in Grand Forks in a student center, and we got the call, and we've been waiting, and it was just so exciting. At that point, it was bipartisan. We had a Republican on board. We've just reintroduced it, or Ted Deutsch from Florida. It's not our legislation, just feels like it. Introduced it with 28 other members of the House, all Democrats, and here they are.
And what's important about this list?
I don't see the list. Sorry, we're on two computers here. The important thing on the list is that we have Dean Phillips and Angie Craig, our co-sponsors, and they were original. Dean was on board very early and has been a huge champion, for making this thing bipartisan and working hard to get more and more people. So you'll see this list grow. It was just introduced April 1st. And so now we're on the fast track to get more co-sponsors and to get this to be part of President Biden's climate package.
And though Representative Deutsch is still very committed to bipartisanship, he didn't want to wait until he found a Republican co-sponsor, because he wanted this bill and this model of carbon pricing to be part of the conversation early on, while President Biden is still forming his climate policy. And it works like our carbon fee and dividend model. So it will drive down carbon pollution and bring climate change under control by putting that fee on fossil fuels at their source, giving the money back to households in the form of a dividend. It starts at $15 a ton of carbon pollution when that fuel is burned, and it will rise every year. So it's a slowly rising fee, which many businesses see as something that is more predictable for them in their long-range planning. There also is a border adjustment that protects U.S. businesses from other countries that might not have a carbon price. And at the same time, it also encourages other countries to add carbon pricing of their own, which is a trend that we're seeing around the world. You may have heard that the European Union is talking about putting in a carbon border adjustment coming fairly soon. So I'm going to talk through these benefits of this particular legislation of getting us to net zero by 2050, affordable clean energy, it saves lives, and it puts money in your pocket. This legislation puts a goal, it writes into the legislation a goal of being net zero by 2050. So in the first 5 years alone, it will get us to a 30% reduction in emissions. It's the single most powerful tool we have to reducing carbon pollution. When you look at the mix of different things we can do, a carbon price drives down emissions the fastest. But I don't want to say that this is a silver bullet. It's not that we could put this legislation in place and we're done. It's not enough. So in order to get to that net zero target, it actually will need to have other solutions as well. So don't give up on any of the things you're already working on and just join this movement, right? It's an idea that we need to have all of these things together, but that carbon pricing is, and in particular, this model that gives that money back to households is so important as a piece of moving us quickly. This policy, the government makes fossil fuels more expensive by charging that fee on carbon pollution, and businesses compete to provide clean energy solutions. The resulting innovation will reduce our pollution fast and efficiently, leading to plenty of reliable and affordable clean energy. Because non-fossil fuel-based energy becomes cheaper by comparison when you have now put the actual cost of that carbon pollution into effect. And it saves lives. This will improve health, saving 4.5 million American lives over the next 50 years by reducing the pollution that we breathe. Poor air quality is responsible for 350,000 American deaths every year, and it sickens thousands more. I don't know if you've seen, there have been recent studies that show that poor air quality has a much bigger impact on health than we previously thought. And I think we've seen some of that with COVID and how it's been even more impactful on those who have underlying lung and breathing problems. And I personally am very aware that communities of color have some of the highest rates of asthma due to polluted air. So for me, this is a justice issue as well. This policy is affordable for ordinary Americans because it puts money in your pocket. The money collected from the fees is given as a monthly dividend or a carbon cashback payment to every American to spend however you want to. There's no restrictions. So most low and middle income Americans will come out financially ahead. Like I said, I came to working on climate change from a social justice perspective. So protecting low income households is particularly important, that they don't bear an undue share of the cost. So the dividend that will be received by most low-income households is larger than the increasing costs that happen because of this policy.
And it will also drive buying practices and encourage entrepreneurs to do the right thing. So what we really seek to do is to get this message from the business community, from the faith community, from the athletic community, from the entertainment community. We have over 2,500 endorsements from James Hansen and Catherine Hayhoe and Don Cheadle. And of course, the one that we chose today is Jessie Diggins, our hometown skier from Afton, Minnesota. And she says, we have to do it in a way that doesn't hurt families economically, which is why I'm supporting the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act, because it puts a fee on carbon and returns the revenue to households. Simple economic solution, something that everyone can endorse as you can as an individual, your group, and your church, and maybe you already have, and join the chorus, but then continue to take action. So CCL is 12 years old.
Oh, I got another one.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You jumped ahead of me on slide.
I did, yeah.
Citizens Climate Lobby, or CCL, is working to build political will for climate solutions. So we work with the public in talking about this, but also we work specifically with our members of Congress and their staff to build support for the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act, as well as other solutions. But this is the main thing we are really working on right now. We build relationships with those staff members and members of Congress. And we build those relationships based on respect, appreciation, and gratitude, even when we don't agree with them. So we are clearly working on both sides of the aisle with Democrats and Republicans because we feel it's really important to have all of them on board. And we have some suggestions that we're going to share with you on how you can get involved.
And our partnership with Braver Angels has really, in the last year, has been incredible because we've really learned about listening to oppositional thinking and ideas, and how do you find common ground when it seems like you are so separated. And Braver Angels is an organization that we are working closely with in getting trained to seek that common ground. And it's quite great because they have taken tough issues, brought conservatives and liberals together, and at the end of the debates, which can be very strong, they always end with respect and appreciation for each other. And I really like that about CCL. We have chapters in 52, maybe 60 countries now. Joe Robertson, who lives in Minneapolis, is the global strategy coordinator. But we're focusing right here in the United States, where we have nearly 600 chapters, 18 in Minnesota. We've got chapters, in Stillwater, in St. Paul, in Minneapolis, in Eden Prairie, in Scott County, Red Wing. So these are people that have meeting every single month, and many of them work pretty tirelessly on these issues to build that relationship. There are over 200,000 supporters. And when the bill was released on April 1st, 1,000 people joined within an hour. So people are ready to take action and get involved in their community. We work with, how our volunteers work is with one of 5 levers. Some chapters are very organized and they work in all areas. They lobby Congress, both virtually, and twice a year we go to DC. We're hoping to be able to go back to DC in November of this year, but now we do our national conferences virtually. We had one in March. We'll have another one in June. Last March, we had over 400 meetings with members of Congress via Zoom or their staff. We work on media, 4,000 letters to the editor last year. And letter writing is a really important part, and also learning to work with social media. Grassroots is tricky. It's all done virtually now, but normally we're at farmers markets and parks and festivals talking to people. Grass tops would be working with leaders of organizations, the head of the Sierra Club for the North Chapter, the minister of your church, the head of a Cargill company, and get the people who can trickle down from their post as a leader in the community. And then group development is just, how do we make our group more effective? Who's bringing the treats for the meeting? Who sets up the place where we're meeting? And again, we have learned to be very effective with virtual communications in the last year. But CCL's been doing this kind of work for a long time. Way before the pandemic with Zoom. To get more information and to find out about how to start a chapter or join a chapter, we have a very active chapter in Minneapolis, and it's mostly young people. And by young, I mean, most of them are 35 and under. Every Wednesday night, we have a 45-minute session. If you go to cclusa.org/intro, you can learn more about how to get involved. And then you can also find out more about the Energy Innovation Act at energyinnovationact.org.
And I want to say, before I jump into some options for you, one of the things I've really noticed, Paul and I have been working with CCL Paul longer than I have for 8 to 10 years now. And we really have seen a shift in the conversations, especially in Republican offices. And even though we don't have a Republican co-sponsor right now on the bill, on the Energy Innovation Act, even in March, we have definitely seen a shift of they're asking a lot more questions. There's a lot of interest in finding out more. They're still considering what are the different options, but there is definitely no doubt that Climate change is something that is a priority in the Biden administration, and therefore everyone knows something will happen, and Republicans do want to be a part of that conversation, and they're really looking at what are the ways and what are the bills that they want to support. So even though you may not see it always in the public realm, it's really enlightening when you are part of lobby meetings and then sharing that information across the organization of how things went in lobby meetings, to see that things are really shifting, and those conversations that happen within their offices are so important to see that it's shifting when it's not always what we see in the media. So related to that, you know, I'm sure many of you know that calling your representative and your senators, both local politicians, state representatives, as well as our federal ones, is a really important thing to do, and an important way to let them know what's happening. Writing letters to them is also important so that they know what priorities are important to you. And our goal with Citizens Climate Lobby is to make sure that climate solutions and climate change issues stay at the top of the agenda for all of our members of Congress by having regular constituent calls reminding them how important it is. Even from those who are very strongly supportive, they tell us how important it is when they get phone calls that keep reminding them, because they need to be able to back this up and say, why am I working on this issue? Because I keep getting all these calls from my constituents. So we have a monthly calling campaign, and there's this great tool you can sign up at cclusa.org/MCC for monthly calling campaign. And you can you'll get an automatic reminder when it's your day to call. The system automatically distributes people throughout the month. And it gives you talking points as well. And our goal is then to have every office getting a call every day throughout the month from a constituent saying climate change is important, carbon pricing is important, we need you to take action on this. So if you go to cclusa.org, you'll see this screen, and you can choose to have your reminders sent to you by text message or by email. It's your choice. You just fill in your name and then either your phone number or your email address that gets used by the system to send you your reminders and the talking points.
Dean Phillips has said to us many times, he says, you have to be in my face. We need to hear about this from you. I want to support your efforts, but we have a lot on our table. And we know that, you know, getting to the top of the line is not an easy thing. But when they get calls constantly and you're building that momentum, that is really important, especially right now when they're making these big decisions about how to spend all this money.
And you can join this monthly calling campaign. You don't have to make any other commitment to CCL. You can just be one of the callers and take, you know, the few minutes to call your representative and your 2 senators every month. Just takes a few minutes for each one. So we'd love to have you join in on that. Another thing that we're working on, so currently carbon pricing is not a part of President Biden's climate plan, at least not in the part that he has released publicly. And we keep hearing, you know, it's still a work in progress, it's not finalized. There are many in his administration who are supporters of carbon pricing. Secretary of the Treasury, Janet Yellen, was one of the first economists to sign a letter saying carbon pricing is what we really need to have to reduce our carbon emissions. John Kerry, just the other day in an interview when asked about carbon pricing, said there clearly is some consideration for it. At some point we need to have it, but he wasn't making any promises of when. Well, President Biden is going to make big announcements around Earth Day on climate action, and we want him to include carbon pricing in that conversation. Specifically, we want to see it be the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act, but just to hear him say carbon pricing would be good. So we have a campaign to actually send postcards to the president. And there's this fancy little app that you can use on your phone that you can then use one of your digital pictures to create a postcard. CCL has negotiated with this My Postcard app, and they will send 3,000 of them for free. So if you go to cclusa.org/postcard help, it'll actually walk you through the whole process and give you the code so that you can send your postcard to the president for free.
And postcards are better than letters because they don't have to go through the screening process. So it can actually be delivered quickly and get to him. But this is this is like the urgent action to do it now to have the biggest impact, is do this postcard. You can send as many as you want, but the first one is free.
And if you don't like apps, go ahead and take any postcard out of your drawer, any old-fashioned postcard, and handwrite a letter and send it off to the White House. That works too. We just want to flood him with postcards. There's been over 400 postcards that we know have been sent so far from volunteers.
So we will be going, as I said, back to DC. Jim has gone with us before, and it's an empowering process. This year, there may be more security, and we may not have our group picture with 1,500 people on the steps of the House, but we'll see. We will be having a June conference online, June 12th and 13th. But I really invite you maybe to send a couple representatives to come to DC. And we always go by Amtrak. So we take the train there, spend a couple days lobbying Congress. We cover all 535 offices. So it'll be interesting to see it happen. And all you need to do is go to the CCL website and hit the join button, and then you'll get the monthly newsletter. They won't ask you for any money. They just want people to be informed and to be active. So please consider this.
And if you want to give money, that's okay too.
This is a picture of Marshall Saunders, a dear friend who worked with me 20, 30 years ago on micro enterprise and a group Results, which actually was the forerunner to Citizens Climate Lobby. And Marshall was a businessman. He funded CCL for probably the first 5 or 6 years until we got so big that we had to start raising money. He says that I used to think that the important people were taking care of the important problems. Now, preserving a livable world is up to us little people. What we do and do not do really count. Last year when I skied my Berkey, Marshall's picture was on my skis to remind me of him. He passed away a year ago, January. And so I continue my work remembering the people that have gone before us as a legacy to the actions that will continue to make a difference for the young people that we've been working with that are now turning into climate leaders all over Minnesota and the country. And so for me, creating this future generation of not just activists, but people who live their lives in a different way is what's happening. We're in a generational transformation that's going on, and working with the young people to keep them engaged is so important. And we are all a part of that.
So that's the end of what we have for prepared slides, because we want to spend the rest of the time hearing from you and engaging in a dialogue. I'm sorry I can't see your faces, but I know you're there because I can see your names. So what did you learn today? What is energizing you? What actions are you ready to take? And what questions do you have? I'll just share my contact information here, and then we can stop sharing the slides and see what questions may have come in.
And this is Dave Homans, and I think I get to let you know about the great questions that we're receiving from people. The first one is really, it's sort of nuts and bolts, but I think it helps people understand exactly what this could look like. And so the question is, what is the current cost of coal per ton? And then with the proposed carbon fee, what would that cost look like in 30 years? And if you don't happen to have the cost of coal top of mind, I did look it up on the internet for you. So if you're okay with that, then you can tell us what's going to happen to it. And actually, what I learned from the USA Energy Information and Administration Act, and also from Market Insider, is it varies a little bit depending on the energy content of the coal, but we can use a figure of about $70 per ton of coal currently. So I guess then the question would be, if that's true, taking that $70 figure, what's the cost of coal going to look like over time if we impact this or enact this legislation?
That's a good question. I don't actually know. I think it gets a little confusing because the fee is on the carbon pollution, on a ton of carbon pollution that is produced when that coal is burned. So like you said, it does have an impact. There are different types of coal, some of which emits more carbon when it is burned than others. So I don't know the number of what it would do to the actual cost of coal as an element per ton. It slowly increases the fee. Coal does produce more carbon when it is burned than any of the other fossil fuels. So coal produces the most carbon, oil the next, natural gas the least. They all produce carbon, but in differing amounts. And so we've been seeing coal decline already for a while. There are some who think that some amount of coal will stick around. In North Dakota, they have a big project at one of their coal facilities to sequester the carbon, to be able to actually scrub it out when it's being burned, and they bury it. They have the right kind of bedrock in that area that they could bury that carbon deep in the ground where it would stay for the long term. And in the Energy Innovation Act, there actually is a credit for carbon sequestration of that type that can be proven to be safe and durable way of storing the carbon deep in the ground. So it depends somewhat on the coal and whether if they're using that kind of carbon sequestration that will offset the fee that's being charged on it. So that was kind of a non-answer to the question. If you really want to know directly, we can look that up and get back to you. But that gives you at least some idea of how that modeling works.
And it actually, it's a great help to understand that there's the reality of this can be complicated, and it's not just about having the right opinion. We're actually working on the problem is tricky. And with that,
just a little extra on that thing. CCL is, with all the members, many members bring an interest, in a particular area. And so on CCL Community, which you will be invited when you join CCL, you can join CCL Community. There is a group called Coal Country. And those are the geeks that actually study all of those details. We know some of them, and you get them to speak at your conference and to be able to answer those really detailed questions on coal, on oil, working with business, working with youth. There are now 66 of these action teams. There's an action team for returned Peace Corps volunteers that we are focusing on a number of different issues, looking at refrigerants, looking at Kiss the Ground, and I know you're going to be seeing that film coming up on carbon sequestration with regenerative agriculture. So it's important that people find the area that they're passionate about and use that as a way to dig deeper into what's the solution in that area. But looking at coal and oil, we are going to be using those for a long time as we phase them out. The more we can shine a light on the alternatives and getting people to see that, wow, this legislation would really make it clear, what are the most harmful elements and why we can move towards cleaner energy.
Great, thank you. We have a couple of questions related to an international impact on this, and I'm going to bunch them together and hopefully not confuse them. So one question was about the governments of particularly China, India, and Russia, other big sources of carbon in the atmosphere, and how have they responded to this idea? Are they willing to return revenue to their citizens in a similar fashion? And then could you maybe also touch on the border adjustment and how that will affect our overseas partners?
Mhm. There are lots of different models of carbon pricing happening throughout the world, and which ones include a dividend back to households is a good question. I will say that Canada has a policy that is very similar to the Energy Innovation Act, that certain provinces had it originally. Now they have enacted it nationwide in Canada, and their Supreme Court just recently upheld that new law that the federal government of Canada has the responsibility to price carbon. So we often look to the model in British Columbia that's been around for a while, that is a fee, and it's not exactly a dividend. They do it slightly differently with a tax offset, but that's one place where we can see a successful model. When we look at other big emitters throughout the world, like Russia, China, India, there are different carbon pricing mechanisms. I know that China has some. China is both continuing to build new coal plants, and they're investing heavily in wind and solar. And if you look at China, about a third of their emissions is caused by things that they are making for the United States. So it's easy to point to another country and say they have bigger emissions, but yet if we really look at how much of that is, we have exported some of our emissions by exporting industry and purchasing things from other countries. It does become challenging on the world stage of, and that's why the border adjustment is an important part of it. I'm delighted that we are back into the Paris Agreement, because that's important of our being part of the conversation internationally. And putting that border adjustment in there is another way of encouraging other countries to put in carbon pricing of their own, because if they don't, then goods coming into the US that have a high carbon footprint would get a fee placed on them at that point when they come into the US. If they have an equivalent carbon price in their country, then that fee wouldn't apply. So there are ways that it's been carefully crafted in the legislation so that it fits within the rules of the World Trade Organization. So it will be allowed by the World Trade Organization. And like I said, the European Union is looking to do something very similar in the coming years. So I think that answered. Do you have anything else to add?
No, just that what I understand is that the average American has a 5 times the Chinese person for our carbon footprint. So when we look at,
per capita,
per capita, so, and again, I'm not one of pointing fingers saying, our system doesn't work, but we all can do better. And we certainly need to figure out how to make this transition to electrifying everything and having so much more, dependency on minerals, and how we're going to do that in a safe way. These issues around mining and nuclear energy, I mean, they all need to be discussed and looked at from every possible angle, because we can't just rely on solar and wind. We have to figure out, and the best thing, of course, is energy efficiency. Use less and figure out how to live more sustainably in your own neighborhood. I think that is really the key, and then work to help each other, because we're going to have to be dealing with a lot of the impacts. And Minnesota is one of the safest places to live. So I would imagine we're going to see an influx of people coming this way. And, when the Peace Corps looks at these issues, and they're really looking at now, as they're putting Peace Corps volunteers back into the field, because they pulled all 7,300 volunteers out with COVID. Now they're looking at how do we be more sustainable in the projects that we're supporting. And they're actually asking our group now to help in defining, how do we embed more of a climate policy into the work that the Peace Corps is doing. Because many of those countries have so much more impact than we do here at home.
Mm-hmm. And Senator Grassley in Iowa likes to remind us there's no such thing as a free lunch, meaning nothing we do has zero impact, right? So this is all about conversation, public conversation, citizen conversation of we need to choose one option over another. Everything has some impact, and we do need to be honest about the fact that everything has some impact. There are questions about battery technology when we look at moving towards electric vehicles, right? Where those things come from in order to build those batteries. That has an impact. Might it be less of an impact than the carbon pollution that's changing our climate? I like to think so, but I think wrestling, and I think that's one of the beauties of wrestling with these conversations within a faith community, is that nothing is simple, but we talk about them and try and weigh what are the best things that we can do. And like Paul said, trying to reduce your own personal impact is an important thing as a part of this conversation and this process.
And Catherine Hayhoe, who many of you know, she says the most important thing that you can do is talk about it. So, with our Berkey 40 campaign, we gave out a game called the Greenhouse Game. And it's a game that really looks at real impacts and real solutions. And Jim, I hope you got your game tucked in your side door. But check out thegreenhousegame.com. It's a really fantastic game that was created by Alex Dvorak, who is a neighbor to Plymouth Church. And I'm really promoting game night to actually have a cooperative look at what can we do as a community, choose a solution and start doing it.
You're muted, David.
Thank you. You had mentioned talking to people, and we have a number of questions relating to the politics of this. You knew these were coming. And so combining these questions, in the current political climate, how likely is it that you will get Republican support? Do you have any U.S. senators that either publicly or privately might support this right now? And then secondly, what do you know what the political affiliation of your members is like? And does that change with the generation? As we look at younger members, are they more or less balanced politically than older members?
Mm-hmm. Let me start with public support. Senator Mitt Romney of Utah and Senator Stabenow of Alaska, right?
And
got the names right?
Braun.
And Senator Braun in Indiana are all ones that have talked publicly about carbon pricing. So there is some conversation. It is a really hard time for Republicans right now. I mean, the Republican Party is really looking at their own identity. They are struggling with what are the right ways to be engaged in this issue. They're trying to figure it out for themselves. So I think there are many that are trying, they've just come from an administration that was rather hostile to climate action, right? And so having President Biden and his administration that clearly says climate change is important, the Democrats will find a way to make different solutions happen. And even carbon pricing could go through, the reconciliation process. That is a possible option. And we even look at those, we dig into some of that nitty gritty within Citizens Climate Lobby and talk about the different ways these things could be enacted. Our preference is still to see a bill go through the regular process and for it to be bipartisan. So we continue to stand very firmly, and that's what we want to see, even though we know that Democrats can make this happen if they want to on their own. But that's why I think it's really important to continue to engage in that conversation. And I think there's a big difference between our politicians and what they say publicly and what individuals feel. I'm finding when I have conversations, there's a lot more middle of the road people. There's a lot more moderates than those on the extreme left or right. But when the media tries to draw contrasts and to create an interesting story, so you usually see the far left and the far right conversations more than you see that conversation in the middle. And that's why I really encourage, more conversations with people that and intentionally seek out people who think differently than you do politically, and look for common ground in this. We're finding there are studies that show Republicans under the age of 40, 75% of them believe we need to have action on climate change. That's about the same percentage as those who identify as Democrats of any age that feel we need to. I think it's 80% of Democrats feel that we should have climate action. 75% of Republicans under the age of 40 feel that climate action is necessary. And I'm also, in working with young people, I have more and more of them say, we don't really think about this in terms of political parties. We're just trying to get things done, right? We don't care about whether someone's a Republican or a Democrat or something else. So, you know, we'll see what happens. I'm always excited to see how things shift with the generation. But definitely, I mean, our younger generation is more diverse racially and more diverse politically than we have been in the older generation.
And much more flexible
Yeah.
in their thinking.
Yeah.
I mean, if you go to Republic EN, the letters EN, Bob Inglis, who was a very, very strong conservative, like a 95% conservative voter, his son said, Dad, get your act together, you know, if you want me to vote for you. So he got primaried out in the reddest district of the reddest state, South Carolina. And now he runs this organization that is pointing to the values of engagement around carbon pricing and environmental protection. I mean, it's learning to talk about, if you can't talk about climate change with your uncle, talk about environmental protection. The language that we use is really important for not inflaming the issue. And oftentimes, not even talking about the issue is the important thing to do, but to find something else. With CCL, we're still heavily, you know, blue, left, whatever you want to call it. But, you know, we have a conservative caucus. We've got a diversity caucus. We've hired a number of people of color to help us reach out, you know, to become more inclusive, and lots of trainings that are going on now to uncover, you know, our like embedded biases that we've grown up with. And it's not bad. It's just like we need to learn about ourselves if we're going to be able to really open up and be more just again, more flexible in our thinking. It gets tricky when you get older. You know, you just try to remember where you are.
I think we're running out of time. I'd like, on behalf of Plymouth, and we're getting some very positive comments, really want to thank you for sharing in today's meeting. I also want to put a little personal plug. I became involved with Citizens Climate Lobby a year ago. I can't say enough for how thoughtful and effective this organization is. And I would, you know, for our Plymouth young people, this organization teaches you how to be an activist. It really teaches you how to be very effective in approaching government and each other. And it's a wonderful organization to consider joining. So thank you very much. You've had a great presentation, and you've educated us a great deal. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.
Our pleasure.
Yeah.
We love Plymouth, and I have a long history with the Great Hall, from Ski-Doo and Hunger days and coming to Plymouth, and look forward to in-person meetings when we can shake hands and give high fives and give hugs. So everyone be safe, and thank you for the opportunity.
Dave, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Oh, I would just like to close out. I want to really thank you. It was a wonderful presentation. I'd like to mention that next week on April 18th, the forum will feature Theater 45, a theater which is housed right here at Plymouth. Seth Patterson, Plymouth's Minister for Spiritual Formation and Theater and Artistic Director of Theater 45, will tell us all about the theater. We hope to see you next Sunday at 9:30, and thanks for joining us today.